Okay, great. I think we'll go in order, hopefully. But some of your last question may tap into. Okay, so we started with the question of what's the difference between the soul, free will, consciousness, and the brain, right? So it's interesting. We are very used to assuming soul and body are two very different things. And there's good reason for that. Our body appears to be very much physical stuff that you can see in space-time. Consciousness doesn't seem to be something you can see, at least it's clearly linked to the brain. It's very, very clear. It's been known for centuries, if not millennia, that if somebody gets hit in the head, it will affect their ability to how their consciousness works. They may even lose their consciousness. Everyone's known that if you ingest certain chemicals, it will affect the way you can think and experience the world. So everybody knows there's something which today we might call psychoneural intimacy. There's some deep relationship between the brain, the mind, and so on. And yet they appear very different. In Western thought, people often point to Descartes as the dualist. You know, we're going back 17th century. And Descartes is often called the father of modern philosophy because he reworked philosophy from first principles. At least that was his goal. So he very much argues for and speaks about this dualism, the mind and brain being very different things, and the kind of metaphor that's often used is almost like a ghosty, wispy thing that exists inside our brains. The Ramchal, Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, is the great philosopher of Kabbalah, quite similar time to Descartes. In some degree, you can see it in his work, the Das Tavunos, you can see it in other works of his, makes the point that both philosophically and Kabbalistically, and for him those two are not very distinct. They are different, but not radically different. In other words, they're ultimately made of the same thing. That thing ultimately being the will of God and the mind of God. And that all of creation is layers of revelation and concealment. So in the metaphor we've often talked of here, of thinking the universe into existence, which is one you'll see in the sources, in that metaphoric picture, or that analogy, when we think something into existence, we fill it completely. So anything I think into existence has no space for its own consciousness and its own awareness. At the same time, it both manifests, if I could make something conscious within it, the rest of that set of thoughts would both conceal me and reveal me at the same time. Conceal me because anyone apprehending the world that I generate for them would not be aware of me directly, and at the same time, really I'm present all over. And that's the kind of basic model that can be very helpful in thinking about creation and existence. And there could be parts of that world that reveal me more than other parts. So in our world, an inanimate object doesn't reveal God very much. It reveals, if we think deeply philosophically, nothing comes from nothing, so anything that exists reveals a creator, but inanimate things do very little. A plant does a lot more revelation, at least of the concept of unity within creation and unified purpose, because it's capable of organizing, self-organizing from inanimate stuff into something that's self-organizing, generating, reproduces, absorbs, etc. An animal does much more, especially when it becomes conscious and some kind of sense of awareness. A human much more, because we can be aware of being aware. We can actually do the mathematics, the entire universe, and at least theoretically should be able to. So we have an intelligence advantage, but we also have the capability of thinking of the idea of a creator of the universe, of purpose, order, reshaping humanity. So in a certain sense, we get the ability to reveal even more, and we would say somebody who observes God's will does so even more. So we talk about these things as soul. But actually, if you think about it, we really mean everything in the world has soul. Because everything in the world, the gap between God as the thinker and the thought is what we call the soul. So everything in the world has all the levels of soul, but not everything in the world reveals the level of soul, right? And just like throughout the natural world, there's constant emergence, which is that as things get put together in certain structures, new properties suddenly seem to appear seemingly out of nowhere. It's not obvious. If we only knew about chemistry, we might never know about biology. If we only knew about biology, and single cellular organisms, we might never guess that if you put a few trillion of them together, you get a human being. So, and we believe further than that, if you put humanity together, you'll get all sorts of other things too, right? Klal Yisrael, eventually the whole world. So that's what it is. Now these things therefore manifest more and more and more of soul. So what's the gap, when you think about it that way, what's the gap between what we call soul, what we call consciousness, what we call the brain? it's not clear where to draw the line. They clearly all intersect, or at least what we call consciousness very much reveals its soul, if you like, and what we call pure material brain theoretically shouldn't, but it clearly interfaces. It may even be that it's brain in action that produces the emergent property of consciousness, which is then a greater portal to all of this stuff. What we do think, I think, is fair philosophically to say, and people get confused by this, even if it turns out to be the case that brains produce minds, even if it does turn out to be the case, then that will not mean that brains are minds, or at least not what we mean by brains in the pure material elements of them. Because you could imagine a possible universe in which there are humans or machines that have the same neural networks and are not conscious. They're not identical things. And you can certainly imagine one in which there's consciousness without those things. So the fact that something causally relates to something else or even produces something else doesn't mean you can't imagine a world where it couldn't be. Just like, for example, right now in our universe, the only way to produce a child is either humans in biological interaction or a lab start playing around with certain cells or so on. We don't have another way. That doesn't mean there couldn't be, and it doesn't mean that these things are the same thing. So getting back to our topic, drawing exactly where the boundary lies between soul, mind, and brain is probably impossible to do, at least at our current level of science. And the three are not as radically distinct as we might want them to be. And nevertheless, there is still a meaningful way of talking about mind without 100% being linked to body and vice versa. I'll give you a very interesting thing. I forget who it was. We did a program in AISH UK a few years ago where we were talking about like the future kind of, I think that's what it was called. And we'd bring in scientists and people working at the cutting edge of what we might call futuristic technology that could change things in the world, and talk from Torah perspective as well. That's what it was. And one of the sessions, which I wasn't able to be at, was somebody who was talking about a kind of horizon concept that we might one day be able to extract consciousness and embody it in something that's not a human body. So even the ability to talk that way gives sense to the idea that even if consciousness is completely produced by brains, it doesn't mean that's the only possible housing it could ever have. And I do think, as we are very likely to be the last generation of Homo sapiens, or in the last 2 or 3 generations of Homo sapiens as we know them, we probably will see a lot of this stuff happening.
The merger with technology?
Yeah, I'm talking purely from that perspective, so that we are likely to be we're going to see all this stuff. But again, there's no question that brain processes shape conscious process. There's almost no question the reverse is true as well. Exactly how these two interplay with each other, exactly how deeply connected they are to each other, because they're clearly very connected, exactly whether one emerges from the other and so on. These are things that we're going to have a better grasp of at some point. And what you call soul and what you call them, a lot depends where you draw the line in soul and them. Look, we say, for example, in our davening, Elokeinu shama shenasata bi tahiri, God, my soul that you gave me is pure, which indicates that the standard point of self is not identical with at least some parts of the soul. Now, as we talk about different parts of the soul going all the way down into bodily animated consciousness. So I don't know if that hopefully answers your question, or at least gives you what you're roughly looking for in the questionnaire. Okay, then we had the question about yetzer hora, right? This, what is the negative drive? Is it body? Is it an angel? So we see in the Gemara, actually, when we talk about, we say there's 3 things that are the same, right? Or we have some sense of identity between them. Again, you have to be very careful. Chazal's language translated into English is not always the same concept. I'll just give you one very clear side example. When the Gemara says, Ein X Ela Y, right, there is no X without Y, that clearly doesn't mean the same thing as we mean in English. Because you can literally have a list of rabbis each saying, well, there's no, day of rain if it doesn't mean this. It doesn't mean that. So they're not meant to be exclusive. Okay, so I'm just giving an example. But when we say A, who, B, right? A is B. It doesn't necessarily mean, it's unclear whether that means they're identical or they're just linked. But one way or the other, the Gemara says that the yetzer hora, what we call the negative inclination, the Satan, the accusatory force, the prosecutor, if you like, and the Malach HaMavis, the angel of death, are the same thing. Now, what does that mean? It's the same person in different personas. And what does it mean when we talk about yetzer hora? Many different ways in the rabbis talk about it. Sometimes it sounds like it means bodily drives. Occasionally it sounds like it just means the sexual drive. And it often sounds like it means a spiritual force or energy. And the answer really is they don't have to be very different, because what's going on in all of this is that back to what I was saying earlier, there's revelation of God and there's concealment of God. All these things that we associate with the word ra, evil, or bad, is on some degree about activating the perception of reality that comes from the concealment of God. Some of that exists within our biological drives. Some of them are very non-consonant with how we should be if we had the full revelation of God. Some of them may exist as spiritual energy forces. Some of them can be all the problems of the world, including death and destruction. And some of them are the ability for something to judgment in heaven to say this human shouldn't exist, which is ultimately a violation of God's original plan that it should. So all this line of, and when we say like a negative angel, what do we even mean by that? You see, part of our problem is we're so embedded in religious language that is not native to the Torah or didn't emerge from the Torah civilization, that we get confused. We think of angels as, some kind of humanoid-like thing, maybe a little baby-looking thing that flaps around with wings, like from some kind of Renaissance painting, based on a literalization of the Maisa Merkava, of the chariot chapters of Yeshayahu chapter 6 and Yechezkel chapter 1 and chapter 10, right? But it seems very clear that neither the Torah nor Chazal nor anybody means to think in those terms, right? So Malach literally means a messenger. In fact, you have human malachim, human messengers, seemingly very clearly non-human or transhuman messengers. But also, the Gemara will say something like, there's no blade of grass that doesn't grow without an angel hitting it. What does that mean? That means the Gemara thinks there's a little pixie comes down and hammers something? Could be, but I don't think that's what the Gemara means. What the Gemara seems to mean is there's in modern, let's use 21st century metaphoric language, we'd say there's algorithms driving creation. And there's programs for all different bits, which explains the otherwise inexplicable Gemaras and Midrashim when angels argue with God. God says do something and they turn around and say we can't. And typically what's going on is God gives them an instruction but they can't know how to carry out. So the classical example, you're coming to the sea's meant to split, save Israelites, kill the Egyptians, and the angels respond, we can't tell the difference between them, which means the program says, activate the program that saves the good guys and punishes the bad guys, and they can't figure that one out. In the functioning part of the algorithm, it's not there, which is a deliberate point to say it was not detectable at the normal level that the algorithm of running creation could work out. Now, we definitely believe they're not literally like our algorithms, which are non-conscious things. These things are conscious. We certainly speak that way. But that's closest to what we mean. So when we say, is the negative drive, once we put into that language, is it an algorithm behind the scenes, or is it, they're all the same thing, or at least they're all deeply enough related. There's real, now, and when we say it's the bodily drives and the sexual drives, so there the confusion is, of course, all these things are not considered inherently evil. These are all things that can be used for the good, and should be, but when they run away and become independent powers and forces and produce self-centered and often animalistic behavior, then they are manifestations of what that means. So we never mean the bodily drives are inherently evil. We mean the bodily drive is a force for overpowering what we'd want to be as a self. That's negative. That's what we mean by that. I don't know if did that fully answer was your question? Yeah. That's enough for that, or follow up on that? Okay. Then, now I wanted to touch a little bit. Remind me, you were asking specifically about God coming down. The reason that's related to all of this is because when we're talking about layers, let's say again between the thought and the thinker, coming down means one of two things, but they're both almost the same. One is that God allows, normally there's layers of concealment. That is to say, if we were to be completely conscious of God right now, we'd stop existing. Right? If I'm thinking world into existence, everything inside it is my consciousness filling it up. It doesn't have space for its own existence. There has to be some kind of withdrawal / concealment / something to allow something to feel its own existence. And so, and we see that actually in the Midrashim, and when it comes to Sinai, that God reveals himself and we stop existing momentarily. He has to pull back to let us come back to life again. And that's part of why we have to work in a world where God's presence is not manifest in order to eventually be that when God's presence is manifest, because we invited it in. So even if we struggle to maintain it, we'll always have the memory that it was our self or choice that brought that presence in. So when God comes down, it means that God is able now to build the portal of direct communication, that the person he's communicating with is capable of receiving that without being destroyed. And even then, it will usually be when the person's in some kind of dream state or something, not in their fully external activated conscious state. And exactly where the boundary line is a famous argument that will, where Rambam, Maimonides says, apart from Moshe, nobody ever, in fact, even Moshe, you don't encounter angels, for example, in physical form because they're the algorithms behind reality, not the actual way we experience space-time and reality, and therefore any encounter with one of them has to be in a transcendent state. Obvious questions on that, which Nachmanides the Ramban asks is, well, what about stories that seem to leave physical impact or where more than one person's having the encounter? That's a whole different important discussion. But the point is, that's what it means God comes down. It means he's bringing his direct communication with the world right down towards the consciousness of where the world is. When he says, let me come down and see what's going on, right? So that's a different type of thing. Whenever we talk about God remembering, let's say God remembers Noach as an example. What does that mean? So in Hebrew, the word zachar is not memory, right? This I explained something earlier this week. Zachar is not memory. Zachar is primary consciousness. So when you bring the past into the present, which is what memory is, that's a zachar. But for example, the Torah says zachar is yom Shabbos akacho. Doesn't mean remember it's Shabbos. It means be conscious that it's Shabbos. So God is vayizkar means, let's say he remembers Noach. It means no, now Noach becomes the center of the consciousness. Till now it's been destroying the old stuff in the world, now it's about building the new one. So in a similar way, when God says he's coming down, it means he's now shifting this to the center of consciousness. The world is now going to oscillate around this particular thing. But when he comes down to speak to man or to interact with man, it means he's going to manifest something that's going to cause a penetration into the outer layer of God's revelation, that if something is anti-God, it will be destroyed by. If it's a vessel to receive, if the person or civilization are a vessel to receive God, they will receive godliness. So when God comes down, something big is going to happen, right, in the world, that's going to either destroy a resistance to God or anti-Godness, or it's going to reveal itself to that which is ready for the revelation.
That allows Avram to negotiate.
That allows Avram to speak on a certain level to God, right? Because you see, you and me right now, yes, you could say on some deep level all of creation is God speaking, right? But it's not with a clarity of when you're speaking to me, I don't have, or I'm speaking to you, I don't hear the exact words, that it's unambiguous. And at that level of penetration of God's presence is absolutely unambiguous. That's what prophecy is. Now, the truth is not 100% unambiguous because prophets always seem to receive some fuzziness in the message, something that requires some interpretation. But it's a lot clearer than just trying to figure out what God wants from looking around things in history. It's much more like a human talk. It's like a human talking to us or it's not a human, it's like a being talking to us who so much vastly grasps reality so much more that we can't fully understand everything that's in the message. It's like if we could somehow communicate to an ant, right? There'd always be things the ant doesn't quite understand in that message, right? But there'll be enough there that it can be absolutely clear. It's getting certain, like turn to the right, it's good for you, trust me, and what you'll be able to build if you follow my instruction will be something even greater than an ant hole. Okay, there's obviously a lot more to it than that, but that's so that's what will be going on with Revelation. They're coming down. Was there a question before the one about the Beis Hamikdash, apart from the ones that we've... the Messiah, yes, that's right, your question, sorry. Okay, so what are these compensatory mechanisms? You're right, we have this kind of interesting, almost contradiction, one that's explicit, one part of which is not explicit. The explicit part is that we talk about earlier generations having greater levels than us, and that's very explicit in the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu has this pinnacle and the Jewish people revelation. We never get anything like it again. In fact, there's a very steep curve quite down of diminishing levels of revelation, such that by the Second Temple, any miracles we're talking about are very hidden. Concealed miracles. There are stories in the Gemara of individuals who have these bizarre, miraculous things, but they're very private. Even quite quickly in Tanakh, we see wars that work out amazingly, but really, after the War of Jericho, you no longer have that kind of open miracle. Once we mess up with Ai and so on, and even things like the sun standing still for Yoshua could easily have been perceived as natural. The Maharal says, in fact, the people, the Amorites themselves, may not even notice that they may have been dark for them. And so we don't really have these kind of same level of open miracles. And there's a reason for that. The reason is we don't theologically like miracles. Because miracle implies the plan of creation itself can't deliver the revelation of God. See, in a world where you believe that, and this I'll tie in a little bit to the Beis Hamikdash point over here, in a world where we believe that what we were doing was we do good, we enter like almost a virtual reality world, and we do positive and negative things, and we come out on the other side, here's your reward, here's your punishment. If that was the model of the world, then fine. You wouldn't need Moshiach, you wouldn't need Beis Hamikdash, you wouldn't need the world, you wouldn't need any of this stuff. And but that's not what we believe. We believe the world is a story being co-authored by God and man. And that's why it has a direction, and that's why, according to most opinions, the world to come is going to be back here. This world will transform itself back into the Garden of Eden and the highest consciousness of God and all this kind of stuff, the oneness of first the Jewish people and then the whole world, and all these things will happen here, I mean in the same physical space. And the reason for that is then what that means is that everything we're doing in life is shifting the whole picture of history and creating that revelation, or resisting it. So the significance of our choices is magnified enormously, which is why the book of the Tanakh that reveals God the most is the Megillah, the Purim story, even though it has no revelation of God at all in a micro detail. It reveals that the whole thing is a revelation of God. That's vastly more significant. It reveals how little control we have in trying to manipulate the whole thing. The other book that does that is the book of Koheles, but in a very different way, is that we have zero. We're like the butterfly trying to flap its wings and generate a tornado. We know the proverbial butterfly can flap its wings and generate a tornado, but the butterfly can't consciously do it. Even if it was conscious, it can't. There's too many complex interacting factors that you cannot know which way to swivel to get that result. And yet the whole will reveal God, which means every positive impact we throw into this impacts in ways we can't even begin to imagine. That's the power of a vision of a world where it will include stages where God's presence will be revealed here in a Beis Hamikdash. That's why we want the presence of God here, right? Because then from there we go up to the next stage, which is the whole, again, first Jewish people, ultimately whole mankind coming as one, and literally in some level perhaps dissolving into some super oneness that's completely conscious of God, where our consciousness starts to re-enter what the Garden of Eden consciousness was, and all that kind of stuff. These are very, very critical things. But what it also means, okay, is that we don't like miracle. Okay, because miracle means that the narrative's failing, God's got to intervene and save it. Which would basically, if the final chapter of history was written in a completely miraculous way, and now I'm sidetracking, I'm going to get back to your topic soon, because you'll see it's relevant. If it was to get there, then we would basically be failures. So yes, God reveals himself, and the point of revelation is to reveal what we could be and what our closeness to Hashem could be, and then he takes it away, and we've got to now build history and get back there. So prophecy goes down, and eventually we drop in levels, and then you got the next teaching of the rabbis, which is if the earlier generations were like angels, we're like humans. If they're like humans, we're like animals, etc. And a principle called yeridas hodoros. And you even have a sense of it in that, for example, if you look at things, and this is where the seeming contradiction comes, is that, well, let me give you the contradiction and I'll show they resolve, because that contradiction really answers your question. At the same time, when we look at a debate in the Gemara, so it can be very sophisticated. In the Mishnah, they rarely get very sophisticated. The Gemaras seem, especially the Bavli, the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, seem to be a lot more intricate and philosophically, let's say, sophisticated. But then the Rishonim, all the medieval commentators, seem to take it to the next level of sophistication. And then the Acharonim, the last 500 years of seem to take it to the next level. By the time you get to Shimon Shkop, you're doing analytical philosophy on Torah law. And you often ask yourself almost the cynical question, did the Rambam really mean what Reb Chaim Brisker or what Reb Shimon Shkop or what somebody says about him? Did he really think about all these things? And sometimes the answer may well be yes, and sometimes maybe not. And what do you do with that? So on the one hand, we're talking about these generations being less and less and less. Then on the other, you got Rabbi Daniel Yosef in our lifetime who could remember, 14,000 books that are written, and what's going on with all this? And an analytical analysis in the last 300 years, the brilliance of which we haven't seen, at least explicitly, in previous generations. And I think those two processes are very similar processes. Our spiritual intuition appears to diminish. for example, even a Rishon, so even let's say you go back 800 years ago, a Rashi will just say this, there's a certain point in his argument where something will just be an intuitive base from which to argue. Like, this clearly would be forbidden, and therefore. And we wouldn't have that same intuitive grasp of what's going on over there. But we will compensate for that by extra analysis. So a great analogy for this, which I heard when I was in Caribbean, the Rosh Yeshiva at the time was Rav Goldvich, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, and he gave, again, I don't remember where he quoted it from, so I apologize, but he was bringing an example of why the Babylonian Talmud is called, we use a posuk from Eicha, Machshakim Shivani, in the darkness God brought me back, and the Chazal says, Zu Talmud Babylon, it's the Babylonian Talmud, why is it called darkness? And the mashal, the analogy he gave is that, if you walk into a room and the lights are switched off or everybody's blind, and they have to try to figure out what the objects are, it takes a lot of time and work. There might be a bed here, oh no, it's not a bed, it's too narrow and it's too smooth. And is it a chair? No, it goes on too long. No. Eventually figure out it's a table, right? A lot of trial and error. They start to work out what the room might be like. But if somebody walked in and the light was switched on, you just go, oh, that's a table. So if you look at the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud compared to the Babylonian, it's a lot more like that relative to the Babylonian. And the Babylonian Talmud's a lot more like that relative to the later commentaries, who are a lot more like that relative to the others. So we gain something by drawing out in its place we use the analysis and analytical tools to fill the instinctive holes. And that, if you like, is the compensatory mechanisms that we bring about. The other is, and this goes back to an earlier discussion about origins and authenticity of Kabbalistic tradition, but there is a lot of material and ideas that have come to the fore through things that we call Kabbalah being taught a lot more publicly, that have also provided, and the truths even in general, even what was going on before that was mainstream in the Rambam and others this is not just true in the legal text, it's also true in the philosophical text and so on, is that we are drawing out in a lot more analysis things that are contained often in either in riddles or intuitions from previous generations. That's the compensatory mechanism that we use. Now, when you say people were greater in previous generations, we mean greater in their natural intuition of these things. We don't necessarily mean greater in intellectual acumen. It is true that before the printing press, any serious rabbi, the great authoritative rabbis, had to have an incredible memory and had to have worked incredibly hard at memorizing things, because practically speaking, you couldn't spend your life looking up Gemaras. A Gemara was contained in a scroll. There was no pages you could remember where the pages. If you were learnt it in one town as a kid and moved to another town, you wouldn't even be able to look at pages and go, it's 15 pages further along than that was contained. So yes, occasionally you could check a Gemara, but it would take you a few days or weeks to find it, possibly, but you were not going to do that regularly, and not every town had Gemaras in. Even as recently as pre-war Europe, not every village and town had a full Gemara in, or sometimes the wealthy person in the town had it, sometimes the shul did. So you didn't have access to most of these books, so you had to commit to memory as a young person an immense amount of material. So you had to have a very, very good memory. You had to work really, really, really hard. You were often a rabbi in your early 20s, so you had to have a tremendous ability. But it's not that humans don't have that theoretical ability today, it's that we don't need it, so we don't exercise as much. But Yemenite Jews, certainly the older generation, still memorize all of Tanakh, and there are still people who do these mass memorization things. So it's not the memories were better, although no doubt when you're memorizing the whole of Tanakh, you become much more conscious of every word, and you become a lot more than if you just kind of read it a few times, you know where to look things up. And same with Shulchan Aruch, and same with the Gemara, where you have to commit to memory. You usually, unless you've got a very bizarre brain, which some people have, but most people you have to really, really, really understand the material in a deeper way. True, but that's not, I don't think if you took an IQ test of great rabbis today, it wouldn't necessarily be that different. If what they would intuit about the law and what we would today would be different. And that's almost an inevitable trajectory. The further and further away you move away from something, the less you're going to naturally intuit the concepts they're dealing with. But that's our compensatory mechanism. Another one, if you like, is that we have plurality of halacha, which some see as a very negative thing. But what I mean by that is, because we don't have a Sanhedrin to unify the halacha and vote definitively, we approach every issue from multiple perspectives nowadays, because we just don't have one answer to every single question. We have a set of answers. So those are different pieces of that. Now, have I sufficiently, I did address your question about the basic mix, but I'll make it more explicit. I'm talking in absolute reality. The base is not bricks and mortar. It's a place where God's presence is exceptionally manifest, right? And a place where our understanding is, as you walk into it, you become very different in the presence of God on that level of intensity. God's presence can't be too manifest in the world because we're not ready for it. But the first step along the way is to put it back into Beis HaMikdash, like it was in Sinai, and the step after that will be that you don't even need that anymore. And the idea that in principle you could walk into one physical place on earth that is shielded from the rest of the world and live in the literal consciousness of God's presence with such a deep level that a person could, the Ramban describes a korban, right? Meaning you feel your bodily drives just being almost jettisoned and you feel totally enveloped in the presence of God. That's what we're looking for. We want a place where God's presence is so there that we feel we've walked into that home, that we become completely radically transformed by that experience. And it's somewhere we can go to 2 or 3 times a year, something we can be plugged into that we cannot be currently. We have things like prayer, we try, but we're not, that voltage is just nowhere near.
How would having this thing built do that to consciousness?
That's what the whole idea is. That it's not that when that building's there, God ignites something of His presence inside it, in a place where that's where you can come and manifest.
We don't really know what it means in reality yet.
We certainly don't know what it means in reality because we don't have it, right? We can only know what something means in reality if we experience it. Or, I should say slightly differently, I've said this here before, Bertrand Russell, the philosopher, once said, when we say no, we actually mean possibly 3 different things. Know that something is the case, know what that thing is, and know it directly. So, for example, a good example is mathematics. There's tons of things in maths that we can know that they're true, we just don't have a clue what we're talking about. So, for example, when we talk about 4 spatial dimensions, we can do all the mathematics of 700 spatial dimensions. It's quite easy to do, right? We multiply things, we can talk about what the edge of a shape would look like in terms of other dimensional shapes, but we have 0 picture of what that means, okay? Because it's not in our experience. We have no corollary in experience. And to some degree we do that with consciousness too. So yes, we cannot, in our current experience, know what it would be like to have God's presence, that level of manifestation. So we can use words and we can picture and guess and kind of feel what it might be like. But there cannot be, just like we can't talk about the world to come, we can say certain things factually will be the case. Or as I said, imagine an ant was about to turn into a human. It would have no vocabulary to fully grasp that experience.
It's just hard. It sounds like you're describing something like akin to like what some people describe with like psychedelics. It's like a whole new level of like consciousness gets open. Like sounds like we're going to get something like either we get nevuah back, we get some type of.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now what psychedelics is or isn't a portal into, who knows? But something like the way people describe that, one imagines something like that, but with a much more direct awareness of Hashem, right?
How would that happen? Like, by what?
That's why we don't just physically go and build a building over there.
Right.
According to almost all opinions, you really have to be in the right era to build it. In other words, it's like a stepping stone along the journey. When we're ready, God says, okay, now you can put
it'll materialize.
That's right.
Even all the things that people talk about, like Kibbutz Galios, there's 6-7 million Jews here. If we wanted to build the Sanhedrin, there's enough people that know how to unite and speak to all the major Rabbanim and Rosh Hashiva, like that's possible. So what do we? So
that's a great question. How much do we push the Messianic process, and how much do we just do good and let it happen by itself? This is a machlokes running all the way through. Yeah. So the question of could you actually create your own Sanhedrin? I mean, this is the last time this was seriously discussed was the days of the Maharibe Rav, the days of. Yeah. But I'm saying, but I wouldn't seriously discuss means a significant percentage of the great rabbis who should have been, or as we're talking about in the 1500s, in Tzfat, where they really wanted to do it. And there's a lot of debate back and forth whether it's even the right thing to try and do. I think right now it would be a lot hard, even if we all thought it was the right thing to try and do, it would be a lot harder to figure out who are the 70, 71, whatever on it, because it wouldn't be as easy as you think to try and figure that out. Everybody would want theirs to have the majority and so on. So, and I don't think we'd be ready for it. What we're going to do, we're going to have a Sanhedrin that give punishments. We're going to close the Israeli government down. We're going to have a civil war here.
What are we talking about in reality?
Yeah, no. So in reality, we're talking in reality. But the most important thing missing is the Jewish people is not where it needs to be. Okay. We are not ready for this yet, unfortunately. We're almost got to the point where more than half the Jews who identify as Jews in the world are living in the land of Israel, which will be amazing. We are, please God, in not very near future, not too distant future, going to have for the first time certainly maybe since by Rishon, certainly by Sheni. So we're going to literally have majority of Jews living in Israel, which is going to change mitzvahs and halachas and lots of things, and that'd be amazing. But we're not at the point where I don't think we're close. Well, we might be close. You never know. Things could happen much faster than we think. But we're at the point where the majority of Jews don't keep the Torah. Are we saying all those Jews who do try to keep the Torah are doing the best job? We're all humans. We're trying our best in a very difficult exile and so on. So we're not criticizing ourselves, but we're not what the Torah talks about. When it talks about return to the land of Israel, it couples it with the teshuvah, with the whole people coming back to God. Yes, there's elements of that. Both those processes are probably happening in some level, but we're not at the point where, I don't think we're at the point where by any stretch of the imagination we're ready for the Messianic era. You got the Gemaras when it's all good or all bad. We're probably not in either of those. But we're not, at least, now it could be Hashem, and look, Hashem has a different calculation to all of us. It could be one more mitzvah just shifts the whole scale. That's the Rambam says, you're meant to think that always. And it could well be. But I don't think we're at the point where we feel where anybody feels that we should now go and try and nudge the process to the point where we start activating processes that depend on a level of the people's relationship with Hashem. We've got to first work on the people's relationship.
Let's say you'd be on a podcast, say like a Joe Rogan, Jordan, that type, and then I'm not criticizing religion or Judaism. It's I just want to understand. Sounds like you're saying we have a vision of it's been a long gullus, that we still have a lot of Jews, millions of dispersed, and even there's a lot of gullus in Eretz Yisrael today. Yeah. So it'd be a movement of returning to Hashem in for real. From that derives a sense of we have to unite. There should be a base of English. There should be Rabbanim leading the show. Yeah. And from that there's a base of English, and from that there's a certain sense of high level consciousness, and then humanity kind of achieves its goal, and then we all
Something like that. I would say one of the ways to think about it is emergence. In the same way that we've seen it physically, last 350 years, we've seen that's how science works, and lots of Tanakh works that way. Right? It's the amazing thing about David HaMelech. He's anointed first by Shmuel. He does nothing with that information. He's then anointed by the people in Hebron. He doesn't become king of Israel. It's only when everybody comes together to anoint him, he lets himself become the king, and the minute his son rebels against him, he walks away. Even though militarily he's going to have to confront him, and it's easy to do it from Yerushalayim, because David, for all the strengths and weaknesses, everything one could say, the reality of David is he recognizes he is an emergence of the people. His kingship is the integration of the people into one when they're ready for it. And that, I think, is true of even the Sanhedrin came out that way in the desert. A lot of these processes happened organically, for better or for worse. And then, Hashem then shapes it, but it's exactly like consciousness somehow emerges from a certain level of development of the human being. And so I think that's the process that will happen. Okay, I think we've worked through the first way. I think we have time for one more question at the end. I think we've got a few more minutes still, so we can have one more if somebody wanted to chip in. Yeah, got to.
So what's the latest Moshiach? When's the latest this will happen?
Later will happen. So we have the famous Chazal of 6,000 years, right? It's not one of the 13 principles of faith. On the other hand, the way the world is speeding up now, it's hard to believe it will take that long. Okay. I mean, I remember about 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whenever it was, I don't remember. It was the year 2008 or 9, one of those summers. I was in Washington, D.C., and there was a think tank where someone got up, I forget who, and quoted one of the leading scientists who said that we expect in the next 25 years to have more technological revolutions than the last 100 to 125 before, which we're in the middle of seeing absolutely being true. Right, and so the speed at which the world moves now is just so crazy that we're going to go through the equivalent of centuries in decades and then years and then faster than that process, probably. So, our last, if you like, 150, 200 years is more time for things to happen. And those technological things allow for sociological changes to happen at crazy paces too. So we can't have any clue how much distant the world is going to be from the way we think of it today in the next 50 to 100 years. And here we are, almost most Jews are back in the land of Israel. There's a lot of pieces in place that can make the Messianic era happen very, very quickly. I'm one of those, I say it's completely speculatively, who would not be surprised if technology helps this happen, in the sense that we may have much more higher upgraded humans, shared consciousness, all sorts of crazy things happen. Some of these tools may be tools Hashem's left in the world for us to be able to be ready to be vessels for the next phase. Who knows? That I say speculatively. So yes, in principle we do have that chazal. It's not one of the 13 principles of faith. If we got to the year 6,000 hadn't happened, it wouldn't jettison all of Jewish faith. But it's hard to believe that it's going to take that long.
So should all Jews make Aliyah then? come in?
All Jews should definitely do teshuvah, but there's no question Hashem wants, all things being equal, Hashem wants Jews in the land of Israel. No question about that, right? So all things being equal, anyone who can come here and live in the land should try to. And that's always been true in all of history. We didn't have the ability to. It's always been true. Jews who could get here got here. Just travel until 200 years ago was very life-risking. You didn't have an income as you were traveling. You didn't have food as you were traveling. A lot of people died traveling. So it wasn't a practical option. Never mind that often rulers here were not too amenable to it either. And the conditions here weren't, the land wasn't fertile enough to support major immigrant populations. When Jews tried to come after Spain, it was just the fertility of the land was not strong enough. So all those were factors. Today, it's still not always easy for everyone to come here for many reasons, but all things being equal, there's a debate in modern halachic authorities, is living in the land of Israel a biblical mitzvah, a rabbinic mitzvah or not? No, one thing's for sure, everybody agrees, you can ask a non-Jew to write a document to own a piece of land in Israel on Shabbos. Okay? Nobody disagrees with that halacha. Nobody disagrees that if a couple are married and one of them wants to come to Israel and the other one doesn't, that they get the upper hand in the divorce settlement. It's absolutely black and white, and no matter what source you ever follow, if a Jew can be here, they should be here, right? There's a question about should there be a political state of Jews here? That's where you start to get debates going on and stuff. But that individual Jews who can be here should be here. Maybe you got Rav Yehuda in the Gemara and you got one Rishon as well, but you're really talking minority opinions on that. Yeah.
Just interject back to your framework, like something like I came here a few months ago, and like a lot of people I know, like let's say you grew up in America, the whole system is your model of like keep its gullus, there's based on Migdal, all this stuff. You come here and you're like okay, like I don't know. So in your model, you convince. Let's say AISH is super successful, everything you have envisioned. They get American Jewry, like you know what? 2024, Elon Musk, Neuralink, Mars, Trump, everything, right? Like this is a perfect set of conditions now. And then they come here like, what is this? Like, what are we doing? Like, it just seems there's got to be more than Jews just being back here and like. For
sure, so Jews being physically back in the land of Israel is not the full aspect of return. Daily life of Moshiach. Well, that the Rambam says nobody knows 100% what it is, but there's no question we have to be living the vision of the Torah. I'll give you a clue, which will show you how far we are from this. The Torah says, "Ru'u kol ha'me'aretz," all the nations of the world should be able to see, "Kishem Hashem nikra lecha," the name of God is called upon you, v'yorim imekon, have awe of you. Is that where the world is today? I think some people think there's something special about the Jewish people. I don't think we're.
They're afraid of the nukes, but.
I don't think we are currently living anywhere close to the level that we ought to be. I'm going to say something really controversial, which I may edit out of this video, just because it's so easy to misunderstand what I'm saying. I think anti-Semites are often about 80% right. See how controversial that could be. Let me explain what I mean. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'll tell you what I mean. Let me explain what I mean. There's something very interesting that imagine an alien came down from another planet and wanted to understand humans and humanity. What are the most important things to humanity? So they figured out after a little while they should go to the United Nations. These are the leaders of the world. They get together to discuss things. And they start to say, okay, what are the resolutions they make? Well, about 3% to do with global warming. I'm making that number up, whatever exactly it is, right? So global warming is clearly an issue for humanity. Another bunch are dealing with poverty. So poverty is a problem. There's world health issues. That's the World Health. Okay, so there's a World Health Organization. There's UNESCO. Heritage is important. This is important. These 5%, 2%, 3%, 4%. Then you got issues like ethnocide going on in China. Okay, that's it does get a bit discussed here and there. There was 1 million people killed in Syria. They make 2 or 3 resolutions. Okay, so certain things are quite important. And then there is 1 second. 70% of all UN resolutions are about this Jewish people. There's something wrong with this people. They're not behaving morally, right? What is it? They're killing hundreds of millions. But no, that's other people out there. But they're being attacked all the time, and in wars there's horrible casualties. And so even before this last war, 70% of United Nations resolutions about Israel has been going for a very, very long time. Any alien from outer space would figure out very quickly that's the most important issue for humanity, is the Jewish people. They're not behaving as they should. Now we listen to it's almost like there's a trigger on the subconscious that makes humans behave the way they do with Jews. Right? It's almost like a very deep, you can call it pathology, you can call it a compulsion, you can call it whatever it is, something on the subconscious is screaming the Jews aren't good enough, right? The Jews are the problem. So consciously that becomes ludicrous things like, the Jews are behind every conspiracy destroying the world, and the Jews are committing apartheid and genocide, and the Jews are, and all this time we go, oh, you're being created, this is ridiculous, how can you say stupid things, and then we say you double standards, like any other armies fighting a war like this, you say, wow, they're saving so many lives and you're doing amazing things, and Jews, you're all genocide, right? That's what we say, you're not treating us the same as everyone else. There's 30 wars going on in the world, most of which are actually being fought really barbarically, right? And you just don't even notice it. And all that kind of stuff. And it's true, we're right on that, broadly speaking. Sometimes we over-push it, we don't even when there are some things wrong, okay, fine. But it's almost like the world's saying to us, yes, we are giving you a double standard. The Torah gave a different standard to you. Why are you trying to be like everyone else? You think the world will be okay if you just behave like everyone? Should Jewish people be fighting wars where you're killing lots of people? Okay, we've got to defend ourselves. Yeah, but is that what Hashem wants you to be doing?
Remember, the play devil's advocate in your framework, if let's say that movement takes off and we get people to say, listen, people in America, they wake up, they go to shul, they go to the gym, they learn, they have businesses, they have kids. You do that here, okay, now we get a few, 3-4 million Jews in America to do that here,
So what we're meant to be as a nation, and again, I'm not blaming anyone or anything, but what we're meant to be as a nation is a nation shining and glowing godliness in some way that the world wants to come and learn from us. We're meant to be Mamlechas Kohanim v'Goy Kodesh, a nation of priests and a holy nation. Priest in the Torah, unlike in the ancient world, is not a position of privilege, it was a position of immense responsibility. Right. They couldn't own land.
What would they be looking at?
So I tell you, so let's when we do have glimpses of it, right? We're not all terrible at rotten people, right? We have glimpses of it. I remember. First we started to see it with great people. Obviously, in some gedolim of the Jewish. But I remember just seeing Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach's face. You couldn't. You were dealing with an angel. There was a living malach. It was an unbelievable thing. And you see it with great tzaddikim and lots and lots of people are unbelievable. Klal Yisrael has some incredible people, right? And some of the things we do collectively are absolutely unbelievable, right? Again, I don't want to be egotistical now, but I think Jewish people give per income per capita by far more charity, most charity and most volunteering. And not to brag, we're a million miles from where we need to be, but we should be a people that don't need, that nations of the world are coming. And I think behind the cry and the pathology in anti-Semitism and double stands and all this stuff, there's another voice. I tell you I get a lot of, we all do. We all get a lot of ridiculous hate mail on social media. And people, nothing to do with 99% of what I post is going to have to do with Israel, nothing to do with the conflict. You put something about Judaism, how many children are you killing today? All that kind of stuff. And 109, which is the Nazi way of saying, you got expelled from 109 countries, you must be terrible. Not we're terrible. All this kind of stuff. And it feels like an addiction. It's like in an addict. It's like I say that the current war is like taking an alcoholic into a bar. You take somebody who's got a subconscious need to demonize you and you put them in a context of war where thousands of people are getting killed, which is horrific, and you create an explosion. But so of all these comments I got, there were two that I loved. One was a guy who was writing comments which were not quite, sometimes you get people who they're reasonable. It looks horrible, right? What's going on? Are you all evil people? Is this what you agree with? Okay, so you can start to have a conversation, right? And in the middle, so one of these guys wrote a brilliant comment, which was, you Jewish people are a disappointment to the rest of us. And I thought, that is so right. We're a disappointment to humanity. We're not what we're going to be. They know it, consciously or subconsciously, they believe it on some deep level, right? That look, Christians believe it explicitly. They just might have the wrong vision of what the right thing is meant to be, but they get the idea the Jewish people get it right, at least many Christians, that will be a rectification of the world, right? Muslims slightly different, but in principle, they understand that most of the prophets of the world came through the Jewish people. And so I think behind all the superficial layer of nonsense that's thrown about us, you did 9/11, you did it, and we but dig beneath the surface, and there is this sense of Klal Yisrael is not meant to be another nation in the United Nations. That's not what we're here for. And how do we produce that? I think we produce it by doing lots and lots and lots of good, stepping up our game. Sometimes we can have an impact on a community. Sometimes our individual actions will have impacts we can't imagine. But at least we have to daven for it and care for it and think about it. We have to feel responsible for the whole world. Meaning, if the world is a mess, we know we're not doing our job right. Right? We've got to love all human beings, right? That we're creating the image of God. We've got to understand that we are here to be La'or Goyim Satichi Shayar Navi says a light to the nations. That doesn't mean we can just say we won some Nobel Prizes, right? Treat us nicely. No. It doesn't mean we get to brag about it on social media. Quite to the contrary, quite the opposite. We've got to walk in humility, and we've got to understand that if we feel this is our role in the world, we've got to generate it. How do we do it? I don't know.
Right, but the day-to-day is ultimately, it's nice to get someone on a high, but the day-to-day is what matters.
The day-to-day is what matters,
What
and
does it look like? I'm like,
what,
we'll see,
we'll see, we'll find out. What we've got to do on the day-to-day is do our best to see every moment, as much as we can see our moments of life as conduits for Or Hashem. And the flip side of that message can be we get guilty when we fall short of that. It's one of the most debilitating messages you can have. That's exactly the wrong message to get. It's to see every time we can do something good as an opportunity to impact all of history and just make sure we do it right. And that includes little things like how we walk down the streets and smile at people, Jewish or non-Jewish, right? Save economy offers. It includes how we spend an extra 5 minutes after davening in shul if we learn a bit more. It includes giving a little stock. It includes, and of course we're all imperfect, we're all flawed. Hashem's not asking us to be perfect. But it's to also feel, I would say not to feel the weight of the pain of what I just said, but to feel the opportunity and the amazingness that our good things can really contribute.
Really, that's the honest thing. We don't honestly have the full. We know Moshiach, we know basic, we don't know the full thing.
And it's so good that we don't, because then it's almost like a cause and effect mechanics that we can control. We can pull 5 levers and generate it.
Everyone has to respond to do little good things in their life around them, and then.
Do you know who learned this last? Shlomo HaMelech tried to pull the final lever because he thought he knew what Moshiach was. He was Moshiach ben David. He was literally the anointed son of David, king of Israel, who built the house of God. And he didn't understand why history hadn't come to an end. So he tried to bend the rules a little bit because he thought he knew the outcome. And he was the wisest human who'd ever lived. And it ended up crashing the entire project down. By the time he died, he knew the kingdom was going to be split. It was all idolatrous. The whole thing had completely failed. And that's what he wrote the book of Koheles about. And its conclusion...
He wrote Koheles when his Moshiach.
Totally, that's why he opens Koheles. I used to be king in Jerusalem. I'm not even the king. I don't feel I've got anything anymore. The Gemara says he feels there's a demon on his throne right now. This is like Ashmedai instead of him, which the Maharal means he didn't even recognize his own brain anymore.
So what was
his conclusion? Is by, I really should give a 11-part shiurim on this, but very roughly there's a thing called being mechuba al kol hachayim. You're connected to the whole of existence. And shlach lach machal pnei, so just keep generating good and don't try to control. That's the point. If you think you know what the outcome is, it's within the realm of your zone, then you can mechanically produce it, but it's completely emergent, it's completely different. Just keep generating what Hashem's told you to generate, don't take shortcuts, and the good will happen. And it will be unimaginable.
That's his mistake was he had like he was the most brilliant human of all time. He had like every blueprint of Earth worked out.
Exactly.
And he's like something wasn't right, so and then he's like, you know what? That was an Irish guy who was superficial. And he's like, just mitzvot of shmor, like just do good things.
But you understand, it's not just.
But that is the thing.
You see, the whole of Koheles swivels around the word kol, which is all. It begins with hakol havel, everything is nothing. It moves to lakol zman va'es, there's a time for each thing. It moves over to hakol. It's all the way running through the Sefer, new versions of the word kol. The Vilna Gaon points out that kol with a cholam, an o sound, is each individual. Kol with a komets, an o sound, is the whole collective. Sof davar kol nishma, I said, when you've heard all the, right? I said, kol ha'adam. The whole of humanity is one. And that's what a mitzvah is. In other words, every moment of our life is a part of the oneness of humanity. Wow. That's what it's a whole. It's not just otherwise the whole Kodesh could have been 2 psukim. Everything's nonsense. Just do mitzvahs, right? Yeah, it's not. That's not what's going on. He wouldn't have called himself Koheles to bring everything together for that. That's what's. So this is, and the point is that yes, had it been within the grasp of human reason, Shlomo HaMelech would have got it. That's why he says, I thought I could use reason. I realize it's beyond. If it's beyond me, it's beyond everybody. And that's what we've got to try and then do. Rethink what our life. Yes, of course we should try and impact the world, but only ever the right way. And understand that everything we do impacts the world. The only reason to impact the world is because that's one of the things Hashem told us to do. But it's constantly being conduit for Hashem's light. Anyway, now we really are out of time.